Hey guys, so I got asked to do a video on respawning best practices. So I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to do my best here. And now, as far as best practices go, I'm not going to kind of get into everything you could possibly do with respawning, but I will touch on basically the one method that I feel is going to be probably the most common that the majority of you will relate to. Um, and kind of how I feel like you should go about that. Now, this is just my opinion, and I could end up being completely wrong. You know, I'm not necessarily a professional. I'm just basically these are my experiences, and I do research usually before I do something large scale in a game or in anything I develop with software. I almost always go and do my homework and make sure that I'm going to do it right, because there's really nothing worse than refactoring something when you really didn't need to in the first place. I mean, it happens, but it sucks if it's like, oh man, I wish I would have known. I wouldn't have had to do that. So what I'm going to cover here is basically this object here, the player, is going to run into this death trap here. You can see that I've got an extra collider attached to it, and it's going to cause a trigger that will, well, we're going to set this up, and it's going to kill the player, and then the player is going to respawn. And I'm going to show you how I do that. Now, to set the scene up, I obviously just have some terrain here. Whoopsies. Some terrain. Wow, what is going on? Have some terrain. And I don't know why it keeps doing that. A light, and I'm going to add a respawn location, which I have over here. I'm actually going to go ahead and move it a little bit closer to where the original location is. There we go. So respawn location, and we have a player, and now the player has a main camera attached to it. You can see the preview there, and then also a camera position, and we're going to use this later, and I'll show you how to make it. I'll show you what this camera position here is for. And then if I didn't already say it, we have a scene handler script here, which is going to handle the respawning of the object. Now, in your game, you might want to have this guy, the actual player object, or just the object that's going to be respawning at all, handle its own respawn. And now, what most of you probably are doing is when something dies, you're likely calling destroy, and you're getting rid of it, and that can be fine. But in a situation where, I mean, imagine if this player had textures, is going to have maybe an advanced shader, so it's got multiple maps to it, like height map and or like normal map, specular map, that kind of stuff. It's going to probably have a rig. It's going to have animations that are loaded. It's going to have maybe some audio clips attached to it. It's going to have usually multiple models, right? It's not just going to be a single model. It's going to have arms, legs, whatever, if it's a person, so that they can be rigged and handled separately. I've seen a lot of them have that. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is your player character, your object that you're going to respawn, is going to have a ton of stuff attached to it. It's going to be a rather large object. Maybe not necessarily in poly count, but it's going to be a large object. And if you destroy that, you're basically going to be asking garbage collection to, when it makes its rounds, it's going to have to take care of all that unused memory and mark it as inactive, or however that works. And then when you reinstantiate it, you're just going to load all that back into memory, and that takes time. Your processor has to process that memory, and you don't need to do that. So what I'm going to be showing you is how to give the illusion that you're respawning without actually destroying it. Okay? So how we're going to do that is once it hits this trigger and it dies, we're going to disable the mesh renderer. Okay, makes it go away, and we're going to disable the character controller so it can no longer be controlled by the player. Now, technically here the FPS input controller is what's handling the actual input, but since the built-in controller uses JavaScript, and I'm doing this in C# and I have no clue how to access this from within C# and have no care to learn, I'm just going to turn off the character controller. So, but whatever your actual input script is, right, that's going to be handling the if key equals down, blah, 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 that's what you'll want to disable. So yeah, so we're going to turn off the controller, turn off the mesh renderer, and then we're going to move it really, really far away so that it's gone. And this is all going to happen in one method. And then when he comes back, you're just going to turn everything back on, blip, blip, and then you're going to put the player into the spawn location. And that's it. And this way, why does it keep doing that? This way, all you have to worry about is just making sure that no one can see it and that it can't be controlled. And you don't have to load or unload or reload anything into memory. And it's incredibly efficient. Sorry, I can't talk today. So, okay. So let's start off with the trap. Okay, let's put our player back here real quick. Let's start off with our trap, and let's kill our player, and then we'll handle what's going to happen when we kill it. So here's our death trap, and what we want is basically an void on trigger enter. This is going to be when the player moves into this green circle. That's going to be our trigger because of our sphere collider that we've added. Now this is an extra sphere collider, okay? So on trigger enter, it takes a collider. We'll call this collider. And we want to do some best practices here where we're going to want to verify that the object that we're colliding with is what we think it is. So that way you don't have like a bullet fly through your collider and it tries to respawn the bullet, or even an AI. Maybe your enemy walks through the trap and dies. You don't want that. You just want the player. So if the collider is the player, and we do have the player here as a tag of player. So I just created a capsule and added the FPS input controller, and you'll want to make sure that your game has it set the player, or whatever. I mean, if this is respawning for enemies as well, then you know, have a tag called enemies and make sure that whatever's triggering it, you know, it's just better for handling. So what we want to do actually is we want to access a method in scene handler that's going to start our coroutine. So let's go ahead and pause right here, and we're just going to say we'll just do start death coroutine. We'll keep track of where we're at. So let's go over here to our scene handler and just write the method that we're going to call. So we want to basically do a coroutine so that we can have a very efficient, basically a zero cost pause, and then the player will respawn. It's going to give us that delay. So, but we want kind of an entry method. We don't want to call start coroutine here, because then it'll be controlled by this. We want to start coroutine here. Okay? So we're going to do public void, and we're going to call this start respawn coroutine. Kind of a hard word to spell. And we're going to pass it the game object, and we're just going to call it go. Now we want to be able to remember I said earlier we want to toggle this stuff off. So instead of writing out get component, you know, blah blah blah, turn off, you know, enabled equals false, and then get component enabled equals false, we're just going to write a method for that, and we're going to call it toggle. So let's do void toggle object for respawn. Now you might be noticing that I'm jumping around a bunch. It's kind of just pseudocoding. You know, this is a good way to kind of, you don't necessarily know exactly how you want to write the method, but you know what the method's going to do. So just get your methods written out, and then maybe throw a comment in there like we did here to remind yourself of what you're doing, and then just come back to it if you're not 100% sure. And you'll find that your code's going to kind of mesh together a lot better and look a lot cleaner when you do that. So toggle object for respawn, and we're going to pass it the game object. And then we also want a boolean called toggle. So let's go ahead and just write this up real quick. So we're going to do the game object dot get component, and now we're going to be calling this only if it's the player, so we don't need to do another check here. If we end up finding ourselves doing more checks or more objects than player, then you'll want to do a check here as well. If it's a player, is it an enemy or whatever? So we're going to do get component, and we know he has a mesh renderer, so we're going to turn that off. And I'm going to say enabled equals toggle, and the reason why I say toggle is because now if I pass false, if I call toggle object for respawn false, it's going to turn all this off. If I call toggle object for respawn true, it's going to turn all this to enabled equals true. So it's a really handy way of just writing one method and getting two results out of it. So we're going to do get component, and the next thing was the character controller. So we're not going to be able to see it, and we're not going to be able to control it. Dot enabled equals toggle. Okay. So now that we have this method written, we're going to call it. So when we start the respawn coroutine, the first thing we want to do is toggle object for respawn. We're going to pass it the game object, and we're going to turn everything off. Okay. Now we want to actually start the start coroutine. We're going to do it right there. So let's write that coroutine real quick. So we know that it's a coroutine, so we need to return an IEnumerator, and we're going to call this the respawn coroutine. Excuse me, coroutine. And again, we're going to pass this the game object. Okay. So right off the bat, we want to yield return new wait for seconds. Now, how long do we want to wait? Well, let's determine that by the scene handler. So let's just put 0f in there for now, just so we can get this to not get mad at us. And let's go ahead and just set it up here. So let's do public float respawn time, and let's set that in the inspector. Okay, so we'll put that respawn time. So now we're going to start this coroutine, and this is just going to immediately just wait. Okay, we've already turned the object off, and it's just going to wait. So once it's done waiting, we want to respawn our object. So this means we can toggle object for respawn, and we're going to pass it the game object, but this time we want to pass in true because we're turning it back on. See how that works now? Here we turn it off, here we turn it on, and these are the two objects. Now you can easily add any other component here, .enabled equals toggle, and then when you call this, it's going to turn it off and on. So right now, if we hit the collider, our object is just going to disappear and then reappear. And so let's go ahead and demonstrate. Oh, no, it's not. We have to call this. So let's do find object of type scene handler dot start respawn coroutine, and then pass it the collider dot game object. Whoop, off screen. Okay. Makes sense? So here's our start respawn coroutine. We pass it a game object, and it's going to toggle the object. Oops, and we didn't start the coroutine. So we're going to do start coroutine respawn coroutine, which takes the game object. Alright, so we're going to call, when you hit death trap, if it's the player, it's going to start the respawn coroutine and pass it the player, which is going to disable its mesh renderer and character controller. Then it's going to start the coroutine, which will basically just wait for X amount of time, and then it'll turn everything back on. So let's go ahead and just see how this works so far. Let's go over here. Let's set our respawn to, we'll do 3 seconds, and let's click play. Here we are. I'm going to go over here, and you should see me disappear for 3 seconds, and I didn't come back. Oh, I did come back. Oh, you see the blipping? So what's happening is I'm coming back, and I'm immediately colliding with the trigger again, which is causing me to immediately disappear again. So we need to fix this. So how do we fix it? Well, let's do this. This is the part where you probably think this is a weird method, but it's actually not bad. Let's just get them the heck out of here, right? You might think that if you were to move them, well, I'll show you what I'm going to do. We're going to do GameObject.transform.position equals new vector 3. Now you might be thinking to yourself, that's crazy. Why would I do that? Well, honestly, well, this probably can be a couple, probably don't need to be that big. All this is doing is changing a variable, and the engine is handling where it's at. It's not physically moving. It's just right now it's being rendered here, and then next frame it'll be rendered here. It's not causing any kind of performance hit by moving it that far. But what it's doing is guaranteeing you will not be able to see it, and it will not be interacting with your scene. Now I have a negative 99999, so that it just goes way down. There's no way it's going to interact. Now if you want to do one more 9 just to guarantee, right, or a 0 or whatever, just to guarantee that it's completely out of your scene, then do that. So, but that means in order to fix this, we need to, when we're done toggling it, we need to put it back. So let's go ahead and grab that. So we're going to do public transform, and let's do a respawn location. And we'll come over here to the inspector and we'll set this. Now I already have a player spawn location object. So let's go ahead and just click and drag this right over. Okay, so now that we know this transform is where we're going to go. Right here. So we're going to do game object, which we have right here. It's going to be passed into the coroutine. So this is our player. Game object.transform.position equals the respawn location.position. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So we're going to turn him back on once the timer is done, and then we're going to move him back to the correct location. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that we're going to go with our player. Now look at that. We're in the middle of nowhere for 3 seconds. Alright? So you're probably thinking, whoa, what happened? That's because the camera is attached to the player, and we can solve this very, very easily. But you can see we did in fact respawn, and no more issues, and we can go back over here and we can die again and respawn. But now the scene's not going anywhere. That's just the illusion you're getting with the skybox. We are going to 999. Here, let's click the player. Go ahead and take a gander at those coordinates and watch where we go. Bink! Look at how far away we are. Now, if I put the buttons down, I can't be controlled until I come back. So that's all working. So let's handle that. Let's handle that camera. Now, this is what the camera position is for. So when I created the player, I came over here. Whoops! I came over here and I rotated around. I clicked on my camera. And I looked at that position right there, and I said, okay, where do I want the camera? And I kind of moved it around until I had a nice view, and I kind of liked how it was set up, and I said, yeah, I want it to be right there. And then here's what I did. We're going to get rid of this. So then, once you have the position, the camera in a nice position where you want it, you're going to right-click on your camera. You're going to click Create Empty. Now, what this is going to do is create an empty object that inherits the transform from the object that you created it on, which means this has the rotation, position, and scale of the object that you created it under, which means the exact same thing as the camera. So if you click and drag it then and parent it to the player as opposed to the camera, it's going to maintain the same. So if I click on camera, you're going to notice it's the exact same with the exception of this weird artifacted 1/1,000,000,000th or whatever that is. Doesn't matter. It's the same as the camera. So it's in the exact same location. So perfect. So now here's what we can do. And well, instead of calling this game object, let's call this camera location, or maybe camera position. Okay? So in order to unparent our camera, which is, by the way, it's a main camera, so we don't have to do player.find child or whatever. We can just toggle the player off and we can do this. Camera.main.transform.parent equals null. Oops. Null. Now the camera is no longer going to be parented to the player. We do this before we move the player really, really far. What this is going to do is leave the camera there. Okay? And then we'll need to put it back down here. So we're going to move the location. Before we do that, we're going to do camera.main.transform.parent. We want to reparent it to the game object. So the game object.transform, not to the game object. And now we want to put the camera back. So camera.main.transform.position equals our game object.transform.findChild. This time we do have to do it. And that was called camera position. Okay, dot transform dot position. I know that was a lot of dots. But what we're doing here is we're basically parenting the camera back to the player. Remember, this game object here is our player, and then we are moving its position to the player's camera position object. Okay, that's all we're doing here. So that's it. This should work just fine. We should be able to click play. We should be able to move over here, die, we go away, and then after 3 seconds, we're respawned and the camera is placed back, and we have successfully respawned. And not only have we successfully respawned, we have successfully respawned without doing hardly anything with our processor. The processor probably didn't even notice we did anything, which is, so it's going to be a 0 performance hit in order to do this. So if you're doing enemies at the same time and you have lots of enemies constantly dying, but you're just going to be bringing those enemies right back later on in the scene, just tuck them down underneath your scene, turn them off for a little bit, turn off maybe their AI script and turn off their rigid body if they have one so they don't perpetually fall, that kind of stuff. Disable a few scripts, because turning off a script is as simple as just turning a 1 to a 0, right? It's just flipping a bit, true to false. And then turning it back on is putting that 0 back to a 1. So it's nothing. But completely deleting your object and having all that memory get scrubbed just to do another instantiate and reload everything all over again, plus trying to handle any residual data you might have. If you've been saving variables on your player, you might have been thinking, well, since I'm going to destroy it, I'll need to save those variables so that when I reinstantiate, I can put the variables back. That's a bunch of nonsense. Just turn them off, hide them, and when they're ready to come back, turn them back on and bring them back. So that's really all I got. Only trick that I have up my sleeve for respawning, and I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope it made sense. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you have comments, leave them in the comments below. And if you like this video, please click like and share them with your friends. I do like people seeing the videos. And if you make a cool project, share it with everybody. We want to see it. Alright guys, later.